There's a danger no one tells you about when it comes to spiritual awakening. It's not loneliness, it's not misunderstanding, it's something far more subtle and far more destructive. It's the peril of seeing what others can't see. And Eckhart Tolle has an urgent warning about this, one that could completely change how you navigate this phase of your life. If you've ever looked around and wondered why nobody else seems to grasp what's so obvious to you, if you've ever felt like you're going crazy because you see patterns that others completely ignore, then you need to hear what's coming next, because what seems like a gift can quickly become a prison. In the next few minutes, you're going to understand why expanded perception is a double-edged sword, how it can both liberate you and destroy you, and more importantly, how to wield this gift without being consumed by it. But first, I need to show you something that Tolle revealed about the nature of consciousness, something that changes everything. Eckhart Tolle teaches that spiritual awakening is fundamentally a process of disidentifying from thought. When you realize that the voice in your head, your incessant compulsive thinking, is not who you are, then you've begun to awaken. But here's the crucial detail that few truly grasp. This process doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds in layers. And with each layer, you see more. The problem is, seeing more means seeing through the illusions that keep most people functioning. And when you see through these illusions, something disturbing happens. You realize that almost everything around you is built on lies. Lies that people tell themselves. Lies that society tells to keep everyone in line. Lies that you yourself were telling until yesterday. And it's this seeing through the lies that creates the danger. Think about what this means in practice. You go to a family gathering and you see the power dynamics playing out. You see the subtle manipulations. You see the masks that everyone wears. You see how each person is trying to get something from the others while pretending to just be chatting. And you can no longer participate in these games. You feel like a stranger in your own family. Or you go to work and you see how your boss's ego dictates every decision. You see how your colleagues are trapped in meaningless competitions. You see how the entire system is built on fear and insecurity disguised as professionalism, and you start to question whether you even want to be a part of it anymore. Or you look at relationships around you and you see the patterns of emotional dependency. You see how people use each other to avoid facing their own emptiness. You see how what they call love is often just a desperate need for validation. And you start to wonder if any relationship is genuine. This clarity can be devastating, because once you see, you can't unsee. It's like stepping out of a dark room into the bright sunlight. In the beginning, the light is blinding. It's painful, and you almost wish you could go back to the comfortable darkness. Let me explain this more clearly. Tolle said something in a conversation with Deepak Chopra in December of 2024 that captures this perfectly. He explained that the reason people don't recognize presence, the transcendent dimension that is who they really are, is because they are caught up in the movement of thoughts and emotions in the mind. They are so enmeshed in the dream that they don't even realize they are dreaming. When you start to awaken, you start to see that others are still dreaming. You see their unconscious patterns. You see their automatic reactions. You see how they're controlled by the ego without having the slightest idea. And this vision, as clear as it is, comes with a price. The first danger is isolation. Tolle addresses this directly when he says that being an outsider to some extent, someone who doesn't fit in with others or is rejected by them for whatever reason, makes life difficult. But it also puts you at an advantage as far as enlightenment is concerned. It almost forces you out of unconsciousness. Notice what he's saying. Isolation isn't an unfortunate side effect of awakening, it's part of the process. But here's where many get lost. They confuse seeing through the illusions with being superior to others, and this confusion is the second danger, perhaps the most destructive of all. When you start to see what others don't see, there arises an almost irresistible temptation, the temptation to feel special, to feel more evolved, to look at others with a mixture of pity and disdain. And the moment you give in to this temptation, you fall into an ego trap more sophisticated than any you've ever experienced. Tolle warns about this explicitly. He says that when you believe that you represent the good and are fighting against the evil out there, then you haven't yet seen something within yourself, because unconsciousness and consciousness exist within every human being. If you identify only with consciousness and say that all unconsciousness is out there, that's an illusion. Read that again. If you identify only with consciousness and say that all unconsciousness is out there, that's an illusion. This is the spiritual ego in action. And it's far more dangerous than the ordinary ego because it disguises itself as awakening. You think you're awake when in reality you've just traded one form of sleep for another. The spiritual ego is the most sophisticated trap there is because it uses the language of awakening to keep you asleep. It makes you believe you've already arrived, when in reality you've just moved cells in the same prison. And the worst part is, people trapped in the spiritual ego are often the most difficult to help, because they are absolutely convinced that they're already awake. Tolle talks about this when he mentions that some people use spirituality to avoid life instead of embracing it. They take refuge in spiritual concepts so they don't have to deal with their own shadows. They use their expanded perception as a shield instead of a mirror. So how do you know if you've fallen into this trap? Pay attention to your judgments. When you look at people who are still trapped in unconscious patterns, what do you feel? If there's any sense of superiority, any subtle disdain, any satisfaction in seeing their blindness, then you are trapped in the spiritual ego. You are using your expanded perception as just another way to build identity. And that's not awakening. It's just a more sophisticated version of sleep. Tolle teaches that the best indicator of your level of consciousness is how you handle the challenges of life when they appear. Through these challenges, a person who's already unconscious tends to become more deeply unconscious, while a conscious person becomes more intensely conscious. You can use a challenge to awaken you, or you can allow it to pull you into an even deeper sleep. And seeing what others don't see is a constant challenge. Every day you're confronted with the unconsciousness around you. Every day you have the choice to use this to deepen your presence or to strengthen your spiritual ego. Let me give you a practical example. You're in a conversation and you realize that the other person is completely identified with a victim story. You see the pattern clearly. You see how they're creating their own suffering through their beliefs. You see the way out that they can't see. In that moment, what do? The spiritual ego wants to interrupt and explain, wants to show them what you see, wants to be the savior that brings the light. But presence does something different. Presence simply listens. Presence offers space. Presence recognizes that maybe this person needs to go through this experience exactly as they are experiencing it. And that's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is seeing the pattern. Wisdom is knowing what to do with what you see. And sometimes, the wisest thing to do is nothing. But there's a third danger that I need to mention. And it's perhaps the most subtle of all. When you start to see through the illusions, you can become obsessed with making others see them too. You start pointing out patterns, explaining dynamics, trying to wake up people who haven't asked to be awakened, and this almost never works. In fact, it usually creates the opposite effect. People who are sleeping don't want to be awakened, and when you try to force them awake, they don't thank you. They resent you. They pull away. They label you as negative, as critical, as someone who thinks they know everything. And the irony is that in this process of trying to wake up others, you frequently fall asleep again, yourself. Because the compulsion to change others is, in itself, a form of unconsciousness. It's the ego saying that things should be different than they are. It's a resistance to the present moment, disguised as compassion. Eckhart Tolle said something powerful about this. He said that every challenge, every obstacle that life seems to place in your path is an opportunity for awakening, to become present, or to deepen the state of presence. But notice that he's talking about the obstacles in your own life, not about trying to remove the obstacles from the lives of others. The unconsciousness of others is not your problem to solve. It's their practice of presence. And when you try to assume that practice for them, you're actually interfering with their learning process. You're trying to take away the pain that might be exactly what they need to awaken. Remember Tolle himself. He describes that until his 30s. He lived in a state of almost continuous anxiety, interspersed with periods of suicidal depression. It was this extreme pain that eventually brought him to the breaking point where awakening happened. If someone had managed to remove it prematurely, he might never have awakened. So what do you do with this expanded perception if you can't use it to change others? You use it for yourself. You use it to deepen your own presence. You use it to see through your own illusions, not just the illusions of others, because here's the truth that the spiritual ego doesn't want you to see. As much as you've awakened, there are still layers of unconsciousness in you. There are still automatic patterns. There are still ego reactions that you don't even notice. The expanded perception that you've developed to see others should be primarily pointed inward. And when you use it like that, something magical happens. The same things that irritated you in others start to teach you about yourself. Every unconscious pattern that you see out there becomes a mirror showing something that exists in some form within you. Tolle teaches that you can find yourself looking at the sky or listening to someone without any internal mental commentary. Your perceptions become crystal clear without being clouded by thought. To the mind, all this is not significant because it has more important things to think about, nor is it memorable. And that is why you may have ignored that this is already happening. The truth is that it is the most significant thing that can happen to you. It is the beginning of a shift from thinking to conscious presence, and when you use your perception like that, pointed inward, you discover something transformative. All those patterns that irritated you in others, you start to find versions of them in yourself. The arrogance that you saw in the other person reveals itself as a shadow of your own spiritual arrogance. The need for validation that you despised shows itself present in your need to be seen as someone who perceives. The fear that you judged in others appears in your own fear of not being truly awake. That's the humility that true awakening brings, not the false humility that says, "I'm not anyone special," while secretly believing you're more special than everyone, but the genuine humility that recognizes that you too are a work in progress, that as much as you see, there's still infinitely more to see, that awakening isn't a final achievement, but an endless process. Now I need to talk about the fourth danger, and this is the one that destroys more people on the spiritual path. The danger of using your expanded perception to protect yourself instead of to connect. When you start to see the unconscious patterns of others, there's a natural tendency to pull away. You see the manipulation before it happens. You see the negativity before it's expressed. You see the ego traps before they're set. And with this knowledge, you can build walls higher and higher around you. In the beginning, these walls seem like wisdom. They seem like healthy protection. They seem like necessary boundaries. But over time, they become a prison. You isolate yourself so completely that no genuine connection can break through. You use your perception as a shield instead of as a bridge. Tolle talks about the illusion of separation. He says that this fragmentation is an illusion, but it feels very real while you're trapped in it. And yet, the universe is an indivisible whole in which all things are interconnected, in which nothing exists in isolation. Notice the paradox here. Your expanded perception shows you that you're part of an interconnected whole, but at the same time, it can lead you to isolate yourself from that whole. You see the unity intellectually, while living the separation practically. This happens because seeing through the illusions isn't the same as transcending them. You can see that separation is illusory and still live as if it were real. You might understand that we are all one and still treat others as threats to be avoided. The antidote to this is something Eckhart Tolle emphasizes constantly. It's the practice of presence, not presence as a concept, but presence as a lived experience. It is in presence that you discover you can be completely open to others without being destroyed by them, that you can see their unconscious patterns and still connect with the consciousness that exists behind those patterns. Tolle explains that there is a living presence that exists beneath all forms, not as a concept but as a direct experience. When you access that presence, you no longer need to protect yourself from the unconsciousness of others, because you are no longer identified with the form that can be affected. You are the consciousness that witnesses, not the character that reacts. But here comes the practical part. Because intellectual understanding without application is just another way to feed the spiritual ego. How do you navigate the danger of seeing what others don't see? First, you practice radical humility. Every time you perceive an unconscious pattern in someone, immediately ask yourself where that same pattern exists in you. It might be in a different form, it might be more subtle, but it's probably there. This practice prevents the spiritual ego from strengthening. Second, you distinguish between seeing and judging. Seeing is simply perceiving what is. Judging is adding a story about how it should be different. You can see the unconsciousness without judgment. You can perceive patterns without condemning them. That's the difference between clear perception and the spiritual ego. Third, you use your perception to serve, not to separate. When you see something that others don't see, instead of using it to feel superior or to protect yourself, use it to be more present with them. Use it to offer compassion instead of criticism. Use it to be a point of light instead of a judge in the shadows. Fourth, you accept that not everyone is going to awaken in this lifetime, and that's okay. Awakening isn't a race. It's not a competition. Each soul has its own timing. Your function isn't to force others to awaken. Your function is to be so present that your presence becomes a silent invitation for whoever is ready. Fifth, and this is crucial, you repeatedly return to the practice of presence when you notice that your perception is pushing you away from others instead of drawing you closer. Presence is the balance. It allows you to see clearly without being dragged into judgment. It allows you to perceive patterns without identifying as someone who perceives patterns. Tolle recently said that it's increasingly vital for human beings to go through this shift in consciousness. And although it's a time of great turbulence, it's also a time of great opportunity, because it's most often through challenges that we begin to awaken. Your expanded perception is part of this collective awakening. But it only serves the greater purpose if you use it correctly. If you use it to strengthen the ego, it becomes yet another obstacle. If you use it to deepen presence, it becomes a priceless gift. The choice is yours in every moment, And that choice presents itself dozens of times a day. When you see your partner repeating an unconscious pattern, you choose. When you see a coworker acting from the ego, you choose. When you see a stranger on the street caught in their own mental drama, you choose. Each moment is an opportunity to use your perception for presence or for separation. Tolle teaches that spiritual practice isn't something you do for an hour a day. It's something that permeates every moment of your existence. Every interaction becomes practice. Every perception becomes an opportunity. And that's how expanded perception transforms from a curse into a blessing. But this requires constant vigilance, because the spiritual ego is cunning. It returns when you least expect it. It disguises itself in increasingly sophisticated ways. And it's only through the continuous practice of presence that you can identify it before it takes over. Now, if you've made it this far, if these words have touched something deep within you, then you've probably already experienced some of these dangers. Maybe you've caught yourself judging others for their unconsciousness. Maybe you've tried to awaken people who didn't want to be awakened. Maybe you've built walls so high that you felt completely isolated. That's normal. That's part of the process. The spiritual path isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You pass through the same challenges repeatedly, but each time at a deeper level. And each time you recognize the pattern, you have the opportunity to respond differently. This type of content exists because people like you support channels that speak uncomfortable truths. If this resonated, if you felt like Tolle was speaking directly to your soul, super thanks is your way of saying, keep revealing. It's not payment, it's participation. You become a co-creator of these messages that reach other souls who are also walking in dangerous territory. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a practice that can completely change your relationship with expanded perception. Every time you perceive something in others that they don't perceive in themselves, take a pause. Before any reaction, before any judgment, before any impulse to point out or correct, simply say internally, I see. Not I see and that's wrong. Not I see and it needs to change. Just I see. This simple acknowledgement creates space. Space between the perception and the reaction. Space where presence can exist. Space where you can choose consciously how to respond, instead of reacting automatically. And in that space, you'll discover something surprising. The perception that seemed like a curse reveals itself as a gift. Seeing what others don't see doesn't have to isolate you. It can make you more compassionate. It can make you more patient. It can make you a healing presence in the world. Instead of a solitary judge, Tolle teaches that the basic illusion is identification with thought. Spiritual awakening is waking up from the dream of thought. But waking up from the dream doesn't mean rejecting the world. It means finally seeing it clearly for the first time. And when you see clearly, you can love truly. And now tell me in the comments, have you experienced the danger of seeing what others don't see? Have you fallen into the trap of the spiritual ego? How do you navigate this phase of awakening? Share your experience, not for me, but for the others watching this video, feeling completely lost in their expanded perception. And remember, the danger isn't in seeing. The danger is in how you use what you see. Use it for presence, and you'll find freedom. Use it for separation, and you'll find prison. The choice is always yours. Eckhart Tolle has said that the evolutionary impulse behind this process is the growth of consciousness. The universe wants to become more conscious. And the main purpose of life for all human beings is to come into alignment with this universal purpose. Your expanded perception is part of that purpose. You're seeing more because the universe is seeing more through you. Honor this gift. Use it wisely. And never forget that seeing clearly is only the beginning. The true awakening is acting from that clarity with love. Perception is the door. Presence is the home. Don't stand at the door admiring your ability to see, enter, dwell in presence, and from it, everything you see becomes sacred. Tolle often speaks about the beauty of simply being, of existing without the constant need to analyze, categorize, judge. Your expanded perception can lead you to a state of hyper-analysis where you're constantly dissecting reality. But true peace comes when you can see clearly and still rest in that clarity. The danger of seeing what others don't see is real, but the gift that comes with it is even greater. Use this gift wisely. Use it with humility. Use it with compassion, and above all, use it to deepen your own presence rather than to separate yourself from the world. Because in the end, awakening isn't about seeing more, it's about being more. And being more means being more present, more open, more connected with the life that pulsates in all things, including those people who can't yet see what you see. They are also consciousness. They are also presence. They just don't know it yet. And your function isn't to force them to know. Your function is to be a living reminder of what's possible, a silent presence that invites without demanding, a light that illuminates without blinding. That is the true use of expanded perception. That is the path beyond danger. That is the awakening that Tolle teaches. The journey continues, perception deepens, and with each step, you have the choice to transform what you see into a bridge or a wall. Choose wisely. Choose with presence. Choose with love.